Ladies, welcome to another episode of the Revitalized Womanhood podcast. And my beautiful guest today is Danielle Frank, and she just stole my heart, not only because the title of her book is all the things about winemaking, wine, and kids, and parenting, and comedy, and satire, and all the things that make this world so livable, right? The wine, along with the satirical comedy of parenting advice. And I felt like she's so aligned with everything we do here. And I'd like to welcome you to Revitalize Womanhood podcast. And please go ahead and introduce yourself to my audience.
Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, as you said, Danielle Frank. I am the author of A Wine Lover's Guide to Parenting, the Fine Art of Wine and Wine Management. But yeah, I've really been enjoying promoting this book. But while I've been doing that and on the podcast circuit, so much as, the bigger story and what resonates with your audience is just all about, essentially what you have in your title, Revitalized Womanhood, right? Like living the life that, perhaps you're meant to live, embracing life's pivots and leaning into the moments when they might not fit the quote unquote plan that you had earmarked for yourself. And so I love sharing my story, which is kind of rooted in transformation of how I got to where I am.
I love it. So where were you in your life where you had that moment of, okay, I have to stop. Wait, let me back up. I'm going to ask this question first. When did you realize that there was that moment that you had to say, I have to live differently? I have to think differently.
I think it's been an evolution of many moments. And, I say this like, every pivot, every transformation, it's giving you information, right? And you're building up your armory to know that with the next transition and the next moment, you've done something else before, and you continue to build up your armory and build up your confidence to know that you can do it. So, I think the first shift, really for me was, I'm from New York. I was living in New York City. That's what I planned after college. Go back to New York. I planned on being there forever, and I wanted to work in the entertainment industry. So I got a job at Miramax Films. And it was great. I was living, the life, in my 20s, living in New York, traveling to the Cannes Film Festival, Berlin Film Festival, working for Miramax at the heyday of the company. And I had a boyfriend, and I was nearing late 20s, and, it's very much like, at that point in time, it's like, oh, you get married by 30, you have kids by this age. And so a lot of my friends were starting to go that route. And I had a boyfriend, but I just had sort of an aha moment of, a couple things going on. I would travel to LA all the time for work, and I always loved LA. I just had a fascination, with Los Angeles. Sorry if you hear the helicopter above that. I don't know if that's coming across, but welcome to living in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's, a chase and you hear a helicopter overhead. Hopefully
Yeah.
it's not anyway. So I loved LA, and I was traveling there a lot for work. And I just kind of had this like look in the mirror, and I was like, wait, I'm not quite ready to get married yet. I'm not quite ready to have kids. There's plenty of time for that. I didn't feel that pressure. Like, I don't have to do it by 30. I don't have to do it by this age. And I still wanted to advance my career. And when else am I going to move to LA? So I broke up with my boyfriend and moved from New York to LA and quit my job. And so that was the first of many pivots that really started the journey of learning to lean into the pivot and trusting myself to navigate through it.
You're saying some really important things right here for me and my audience, and especially right now in the season that we're working on confidence and confidence building. And a lot of women I talk to, one of their goals is to be more confident. And it's like, well, you don't just wake up one day and boom, you're confident. It's all of these little micro trusts, right? That you've made. You've made this. So imagine you in a relationship, or you with a best friend, or you with a husband, or you with a somebody, and you tell them you'll do something, and then you do it. a trust has then been created, right? They trust that you will do that. Well, confidence is like you saying to yourself, I am not ready for this. I want to make this leap and go to California and try this out. And you doing it just made this trust, right, between you and yourself, which equals confidence growth. That's one more, you call it your armory, one more like bullet in the gun of I have confidence. I know myself. And even if it failed miserably, what were you thinking at that time? Because that thought goes through our minds of what if this just fails miserably? But what were your thoughts when you thought that?
And it's a great point. I mean, I like to say it's not a failure, right? It's the curriculum, and confidence doesn't come from never failing. It comes from knowing you could stand back up and choose again. And like you were saying, the trust and the confidence. Yeah, I mean, you think about like people that stay in unhappy situations, whether that's a job or a friendship or a relationship. How is that going to build confidence in you if you're not serving, you're not entrusting in yourself to get out of a situation that's not serving you? And, I know there's comfort in staying in a situation, but then you're misleading yourself. You're not trusting yourself to navigate to get out of that and make yourself happy.
Right, exactly. What are the little micro actions you're going to start taking to create? It's just like saying anything in this kind of work that I do. I was just speaking to a woman today about she was saying she wants to be more present because she's got two very littles, twins, and she was saying I just really I focus too much on the future, and I really want to sharpen that blade of staying present, sharpen that tool. And I said, then you have to start doing actions that do that. You can't just say, I want to be present. You can't just say, I want to be confident. You can't just say, I'm going to have good boundaries. You have to have an action that proves to yourself that you are that thing. So that's really amazing. And then so you got to LA. You did not crash and burn. You did not fail. You lived, you thrived, you succeeded in what you were doing. What were you doing in LA then with Miramax
So
still?
no, so there were no studio jobs at the time. And here's where we get into a big transformation. Um, there were no studio jobs. And when I used to travel with the talent, they'd always have their publicist with them. And so I knew all the personal PR firms, and one of them was hiring, and, they offered me the job. And, part of me just always knew, I don't know. I was like, I never wanted to be a personal publicist. No disrespect to publicists. I just know, like, I'm very much, I'm very clear on, like, what I want for my life. Work-life balance is very important to me. And a lot of publicists, if you ever saw the movie Jay Kelly with George
Zero
Clooney.
boundaries.
Yeah. And
Zero boundaries.
like your client is, if like I had dinner plans and one of my clients is like, oh, I want to go to someone else's movie premiere. Can you walk me down the red carpet? I'm like, no, I don't. I mean, I do it, but I was like, oh, now I got to cancel my dinner plans. I mean, yes, we all make sacrifices for work and things like that.
Yeah,
I
but you
certainly,
did it. You had a vision. You had a
yeah,
vision.
I had a vision that I didn't want to manage somebody else's life more than my own life. On top of that, the agency that I joined, unfortunately, it was a very toxic environment. I mean, the first day I walked in, like there were three publicists sitting in their office, like crying. And I'm like, what did I get myself into? And, and I was there 3 months. And let me tell you, in all my years at Miramax, 6 years, I was in my 20s living in New York City. Did I go out the night before? And sure, when the alarm went off, I was like, got to go to work. Yes, of course I had those mornings, but there was never one morning at Miramax where I had that pit in my stomach, that ulcer-inducing feeling of, oh, I don't want to go into work today. Like, I just don't want to be there. When I was at this PR company, I had many mornings where I had just like that ill feeling in my stomach. And I was like, this is no place to live. This is no place to be. We spend half of our lives at work. And, you have to enjoy it in some capacity. And so that was the other big life lesson for me. And the other big pivot and transformation is I'm very type A. I would never quit without having another job. Well, I started to see that when the job and or when the relationship or the friendship, when it's not serving you and it's affecting your well-being, it's time to make a change. And so I quit without having another job. Some of that is a little naivety of, yeah, I was late 20s. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have a family relying on me, but also is because like I just moved from New York to LA. I know I can manage and navigate. And so I had that confidence in me to be like, you'll figure it out. And so I did. And, there were no studio jobs at the time. And my sister was working for an agency that worked for Bacardi USA in the spirits industry on the East Coast. And she said, oh, they're hiring. It was a real entry level job. I mean, it took like a $40,000 pay cut, but it was like, oh, you work from home, you have flexibility, you got a, car allowance, whatever. I was like, oh, this sounds fun. Yeah. You know what? I'll do this until I figure out what it is I want to do. 10 plus years at Bacardi USA and now 12 years I just celebrated at Moet Hennessy. I've, realized, this new avenue, this new path that I was on in the wine and spirits world. And it's been an amazing journey. And, I never would have thought of that when I was a kid. Yeah, I'm going to go into wine and spirits and, all the things related to that. But sometimes when you step off one path and you get on another, you see that, maybe that was the journey you were meant to be on all along. And you don't know unless you try. And like you said, if you quote unquote fail or it doesn't work out, if you have that trust in yourself to re-navigate, reshift where you want to go next, you can do it.
And also, listen to this, ladies. She's talking about these signs that whatever you want to call it, your subconscious, whatever it is, your body, all of these like, uh-oh, warning, warning. It's like on Aladdin when the genie is telling Aladdin he's about to do something bad, and it's all of these signals like, stop, stop, don't do this. No, you're going to walk off a cliff. Why are you doing this, right? All of these signals going off in you to help you see that place, that PR firm, was a toxic space for you, was not the right space for you. It could have been a completely different experience for someone else walking in there it was a right space for someone that was determined to do those things, whatever. They wouldn't have heard the same uh-oh alarms that you were having go off. And this was so big for me this last month in my community. Was our monthly topic was not even body in terms of protein, weight loss, fitness, whatever. Okay. But in terms of with the intent to listen, with the intention to hear what our bodies, what our minds are saying to us. What are we trying to communicate? Because it's the first cue, and we've been so conditioned to shut those cues down because of what maybe society expects of us or what others expect of us or what, because in society's eyes, a job at a PR firm, that's incredible. In LA, a personal PR assistant to a celebrity, that's incredible. That's the dream life, right? I mean, we've all watched The Devil Wears Prada. So,
Yeah,
but
yes,
it's you're listening. No. And so I love, and I hope that everybody listening just caught on to that you paid attention to those cues and looked elsewhere, right? Looked into something else.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so important is really it's about extracting the lesson versus carrying the scar, right? There's a big difference. There's a big difference from just thinking that it's a failure or, carrying the scar, what could have been, or, true learning is really, it creates better boundaries. You develop clearer instincts and stronger discernment of what you do want, right? I created stronger discernment for what I wanted in my next job. And, that's why perhaps when I, PR and that job with Bacardi came up, I mean, I thought it'd be temporary, but then I saw the discernment of work-life balance, and I liked working from home. And, I started to see the things that I matched up to, clarifying the values that I now created of what is it I want to, what's important to me in the space of work and so forth. And that also, I think when you have better discernment on what you're looking for, it also helps you propel you through that career, right? It's like, I've worked my way up and have now a successful career, 22 years in the wine and spirits industry, because I understood better about what I don't want and what I do want.
That's so important. It's probably the number one thing that I have my women in my community do is identify their values. And what's even more interesting is when I challenge them to do things like this, it's like, what are they? And then they come to me and we work together on some things. And I say, but guess what? You're going to live in these values right now. You've just identified them. You're being so intentional about it. And you're going to live in these values because you've done this. However, be aware, be mindful about the fact that some of these might start to not feel right. Some of these might start as you're living in them and as you're going with this, that some of them in the now of you, because these are probably values they've identified from maybe a past version of themselves. And so if this starts being like uncomfortable or not what you thought it would be, good. That's the work. That's like a win. If you can determine that a pivot is necessary, yes, because of that, I think is a bigger success than actually convincing yourself. And you're using a lot of language where it's different than convincing yourself to stay in a space where you thought you should be versus where you actually are and the person you are living and in the life you're living, in the season you're living, whatever. So how much would you say, because I'm sure there was a time, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure there was a time in your life just like that where your friends were all having babies, but yet you identified you weren't ready for that yet. But did it catch up to you to a moment where you noticed that it was toxic to compare your timeline to someone else's timeline?
You know, it never became toxic of doing that, only
Or even
because,
suffering, or even,
yeah, I mean, I think it was just, I mean, there certainly became a time where, like, early, like, 31, 32, 33, I was now settled in LA. And, and I love love. And, had one boyfriend. And so I started, of course, thinking about that, like, okay, maybe I'm now now I'm established here in LA and I'm ready for that next journey. It never got to a point where I was like in a state of fear, because I've just never felt that that's a good place to be, right? People make bad decisions when it comes from, oh God, I'm getting, the biological.
right,
So I really, you know, told myself over and over again, like, it's toxic to go in that place. It's more toxic to go in that place than to compare myself to people in that space, because then you're just, you're forcing a relationship, you're forcing a situation just because you want to get over that quote unquote finish line. But then, I met a guy, and, he was a few years older and he has kids from his first marriage. And, we dated for a while, and now I'm like mid-30s and waiting for the engagement, and we finally got engaged. I think I was about 37, and we got engaged, and it was quickly thereafter that I realized, or it was pretty clear that he didn't want more kids. This was
mm,
something that he went back and forth with over the years. And of course, I just tried to tune it out, like, no, 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 I'll be fine. And he would say he would, then he'd say he wouldn't. And when he proposed, he said, okay, we'll have a kid. And that was really important for me. But then I realized, like, he really didn't want a kid, and I don't want to do it with somebody that isn't dying to have a kid with me. So that was, again, another big transition and life pivot. And like you were saying before about the messy middle, when I broke off my engagement, I didn't lose just myself, right? You lose the version of my life that I thought I was walking towards.
right.
And look, that in between space can be terrifying. I wasn't who I'd been, but I wasn't yet who I was becoming. And what I learned in that in between isn't that it wasn't a void. It's, when you're in that messy middle, you don't stand on that bridge forever, and it becomes a construction site, right? Like, it can feel unstable because, you were on one path and you thought you were on, and rebuilding is loud and dusty and uncertain and scary. But I started to also see that I learned that you don't rush to define yourself just by just to feel safe, right? Like, I learned to let myself be unfinished for a little bit, and identity isn't something that has to be created from your 20-year-old self, or your 10-year-old self that imagined your wedding, or your 20-year-old self that said you'll be married at this age, or then my 29-year-old self that was like, okay, I'll do that when I move to LA. Like, I don't know. You just I started to again, it becomes that trust in yourself, and the in between chapters. It's scary, but it's also exciting, because that's also where you get to define your next chapter. And that's what it did for me.
I love that you'd called it the construction site. It's dusty, it's broke down, there's tools everywhere, like, right? The tools of life that you're trying to pick up and use. Maybe sometimes you're trying to use a hammer where you need a screwdriver, I love this visual concept of I'm under construction,
Yeah.
because what I don't like is this idea of I need to change myself completely, or I need a complete overhaul, or I need a little, um, I had a gal, one of my really good friends post today that talked about, and she says the addiction that we don't talk about as women, and it's the constant need to fix ourselves. Fix, fix. Well, we need the latest trend. Well, we need this and this and that and the other. And I thought that is so interesting, because this month of listening to our bodies and tuning in, I thought, here's a question. Am I actually, is there something here that needs work, that requires work? Or are we all being influenced to think that we need the thing? Oh, they say that I need this, so I need it. Well, do you? Is your body telling you you need it? Do you actually? Some people need it, but some people don't. So it's so interesting that I caught myself in that. We're working on all these things that we're listening to and queuing into. And I'm like, why do I do this? Has my body even ever told me to do this? Like, right? So that visual aid of the construction site, I just really, really love that. Do you think women put too much pressure on the right version of womanhood?
Of course. Of course. And I think it's evolving um through the years, right? Because, think about when I was younger, it's like, you know, women weren't in as, leadership as prevalent as it is now. There weren't as many women, working and having families, or women in like high leadership positions. And, that is the gift and curse of social media, right? And like
Yeah.
everything being so accessible, right? The bad thing is we're so influenced by what's around us, but we also are exposed to all the great things out there, and all the amazing women and people that are doing things and rewriting their story. So yeah, I think that, heeding the lessons and letting it propel you forward. Like I said, I don't think the pivot is the failure. It's just, a plot twist, and it makes your story worth reading. And, I know when my life turned out differently than I quote unquote planned, I just realized I had two choices, right? Cling to that outline that I had written, in high school or 20s, or trust that maybe the story was getting more interesting. And again, it's that confidence and trust you build in yourself. I already saw my life was like becoming so interesting. Wow, I moved to LA and I'm loving living in LA. Oh, I like left entertainment and I'm in this really fun and exciting industry in wine and spirits, working for amazing brands. Like, I've already seen how the life was getting more interesting. Or, like I always say, there's not one yellow brick road to Oz. There's lots of paths along the way. And when you jump off one path and get on another, it's what you do with that to propel you forward. And again, if you go down one path and it's not serving you, well, then you could turn around and go on another path. But I think, we're taught that if something doesn't go to plan, whether it's the relationship, the career, the timeline, we somehow you think we somehow feel like we got it wrong, but some of the most powerful change in our lives are the ones we didn't see coming.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and that's what's so exciting. And it forces you to ask better questions, like it did for me, with the career, it gave me better discernment about what I want with the relationship. When I broke off with my fiance, I mean, look, the children thing, that was just one element. There were other things wrong with the relationship. So that was probably, the shame on me part. Like I probably stayed in it because now I'm 30s and I'm like, and I did love him, but there were other problems. But when I broke up with him, I remember I didn't cry a single day. Once I moved out, it was like a sense of relief, and it created better discernment. Like I moved out, I was never so happy being on my own. And I trusted in myself to manage, my life. And I really love, being on my own, and I know I can take care of myself. Well, it gave me that discernment that in my next serious relationship, I was with somebody for a long time and we were living together. And, when it wasn't serving me anymore, there was some drinking issues, things like that. I already had the confidence in myself to know I don't need to stay in this. I'm fine on my own. Like, it's run its course. I don't want to be here anymore. I want that happiness I have of like, man, being on my own. And so because I created that discernment from, that relationship pivot, and every other pivot, it helped me to move into a space that I knew I'd be happy in.
100%. I love the feeling. I want to, it's actually been my life's work this year. Not really, but to try to explain that feeling you're talking about, to explain that weightlessness, that freedom, right? That feeling that you felt, if you could bottle that up and write the recipe for it, and we could sell it, we'd be millionaires. But the secret to it is being mindful when it happens so that you can connect that feeling with the scenario, right? And then you can repeat it later on. It's just like, okay, I get so much joy out of drinking my coffee in the morning. All right, well, I know this feeling. I understand it. Well, now I can relate that to something else when something else happens, like I get together and have a great lunch with some girlfriends. Oh, there it is. There's that feeling again. I want to continue these feelings. I want to chase these feelings because now I can identify that those two equal each other, right? Same with what you're saying with the negative. It's you were in this relationship and you were like, wait a minute. I don't like this. I don't like this feeling. I've probably been here before, but now I'm going to identify it because I did already and I matched it to a feeling.
Yeah.
And I love that.
And that feeling's intoxicating, right? I love how you said
It
like
is.
bottle it up. And that's what I learned, right? Like one of the things with the ex-fiance is, a little thing like, he was somebody that always had to stay out to the bitter end, till, the bar closed or whatever. And, if I want to go home early, it's like, it was such a big deal. Well, I'll never forget my first night in my new apartment. Walked around the corner, met some friends at this restaurant and, we're sitting at the bar and, I don't know what time it was, 9:30. I was like, I'm tired. I'm going to go home. And I just remember laying in my bed at night, looking at the ceiling, and I just like ear to ear grin. And I was like, I was tired. I went home. And that's what I did. And nobody's going to
And
give
the
me crap
world
about it.
didn't end over
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like you said, so, so that gives me discernment too, like in the next relationship, like, I don't know, and it, he was 12 years younger. So, he was still out
He was
partying.
still doing his work.
He was, yeah. So, there would be a couple, some times where he just wanted to stay out, but I just had the discernment to be like, great, you stay out. I'm going to go home and I'm not going to stay just because that's what you want to do. Like you can stay out, go to meet a friend, whatever it is, you build that, like, what's going to make you happy. I mean, even just little things like, and it's even just like you said, that feeling you have when, like we women, we can multitask. We're we have those capabilities. Men can't. Like sometimes, like I'm a big word game person. I love words with friends on my phone. And like when I come home, like I can watch TV, like a mindless show, and I just like to play my word games.
Yeah.
And it used to drive him crazy. Like, do you have to play your games while you're out? I'm like, but this is what makes me happy. I mean, it's such a small little thing, but I'm like,
It's
again,
not
like,
small. It's
right.
it's a perfect example of identifying what your needs are and what brings you joy. What are we all
Exactly.
trying to do in this life? Find
Yeah.
joy,
I enjoy
right?
it.
What's
Yeah.
the point of any of it if it's not joyful? If
Yeah.
it's not love, if it's not joy, if it's not fun, if it's not exciting? We're talking about books and writing our stories. And I think the man, I think every day I talk about the same thing over and over again because I'm trying to find the best words to describe what it feels like to go from being somebody's supporting character in their story to being the main character, to being the leading lady, to being the adventure seeker, like what book do you want to read? You'll put it down that's like this. We don't
Yeah.
stay in those movies. We don't go to them or we write a horrible review about them, right? We want the ones that go, huh, huh,
Yep.
huh, 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 right? And so
Completely.
if you can view your life like that and see there's ups, there's downs, there's mundane, but even in those mundane, maybe something beautiful was happening and growing, whatever it is. Those are the stories we want to watch and read. And so why wouldn't we want to be living that way? And the only way you get those is pivots. I call midlife not crisis. I view midlife as any time in your life where your this has a one of these or a one of these. It either goes up or it goes down. And you have to, like you keep saying, learn the lesson in it. What was the lesson in that high? What was the lesson in that excitement? What was the lesson in that adventure? Well, what was the lesson in that low? What are you now learning from that loss, that grieving, that what are you learning? What are the lessons? And if we can change our mindset to, if you go back and want to hear a good episode, my last episode with Wendy Valentine, you and she need to get together. You would have a blast.
I can't wait to listen.
Oh, you would have a blast with her. So we were talking about this concept of why do we have to see everything as hard or sad or heavy? Why can't it be exciting, curious, joyful, whatever, right? It's the language. Like I've just pointed out with you, you use this good language. I love the language you use. And that's from living a life, right? That's from accepting these pivots and learning the lessons from it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're, look, obviously, plot twists are uncomfortable. It disrupts certainty. But if you're in that, that even that high or even the low, if you're just, or particularly the low, if you just can't get out of your own way, if you see the negativity, when you see that there's purpose and joy, you see that there's possibility, right? The possibility, and that's where the growth lives. And
Mm-hmm.
it just means that your story can change genres. You can change, and I always say like, everything's a story in the chapter, or everything's a chapter in the story of my life, and so when one chapter ends, it's like, what's the next chapter going to bring? And that can be exciting. And it's up to me to write that chapter, right? I don't have to leave everything to fate. It's up to me to take control of it. And, even if I took one step back in one chapter, great. How am I going to propel myself forward into the next chapter?
I call that creating a life by design. That is what we do in my women's community is intentionality and creating a life by design. Well, I'm gonna switch gears to you didn't have children, but yet you wrote this children's book, right? So what have the years? Oh, and before we say that, I'm going to say that my mug that I keep here in Alaska is totally appropriate for our conversation. It says, I looked up my symptoms. Turns out I just have kids. Totally appropriate.
That's
So
hilarious.
what has years of watching parents taught you that maybe the rest of us are too close to the scenario to see.
Yeah, so I wrote this because I wrote this actually 14 years ago or a little bit longer now when I broke off my engagement. So a couple things happened all at once. I broke off my engagement, and that's when I realized that the path of motherhood might not happen for me. But I still want a seat at the table to how kids are raised. Now more than ever, people need, empathy and not to discriminate. And that happens at a very young age. They're very impressionable, and it's important that um, you know, we impress upon kids at a very young age about the importance of good behavior. And, I was a bonus mom for many years with my ex's kids. I'm an aunt very close to my niece and nephew. I'm Aunt Danielle to many of my friends' kids. And, I was watching my niece and nephew, and while they were great kids, of course, every kid has the propensity to whine, and they were whining about something. And I said, no, Aunt Danielle drinks wine. She doesn't listen to wine. So the wheels started turning because at the same time, a book came out called Go the F to Sleep. So it opened the door for this new genre of like adult children's book. And so it all came together for me because I had been working on an actual children's book series, more for like 6, 7, 8 year olds. Each book, little Johnny zapped away to, one book he zapped away to Mexico, and he meets Juan, a kid his age. And so he's learning like the foods he eats and the culture and all that. So
Oh,
each book is designed to teach kids that, because at the end of the book, Johnny's zapped back into his bed, and he realizes like we all sleep under the same star of skies. Just because somebody dresses different or looks different or their name is a different, variation of yours, we're all human, and it doesn't make
yeah,
one better than the other. So, I always had this desire to help shape, future generations who are going to be running this world. So when that adult children's book came out and I said that I drink wine, I don't listen to wine, the light bulb moment came up like, oh, well, that would be fun. Even before reaching the kids, how about reaching the parents? It's a great baby shower gift. You pair that with a onesie, you're done. The book, but
yeah,
just as a gentle reminder, and you don't need to be a parent. I always say to know good behavior in human beings, right? Teaching kids manners, teaching them, not to be a bully. And with all my friends, look, I've seen people trade war stories like battle hardened soldiers in the trenches, and I used to say sometimes when you're in it, it's hard to see what's right in front of you that like, this grape juice you're drinking can turn into a fine Cabernet. So that's
right.
why it's like, I'm not professing to be, I didn't, get my master's in parenting. I'm not professing to be an expert. It's just, like you said, it's a serious job parents have. It's, injecting a little bit of humor and light and levity and satire into what's a difficult job. And just that gentle reminder of like, I mean, a lot of women, there's a chapter in there about, is your kid a mulled wine? Because mulled wines are spiced, heated, sometimes served as a punch. So this is about understanding like who your kid is outside the home. Are they a bully? Are they spiced? Are they
Mm.
heated? Are they packing a punch? And a lot of mothers, a lot of parents have said that resonated with them completely because, one of the first podcasts I did, the woman said, it really resonated with me because I did get feedback, not that her son was hitting anybody, but she was getting feedback that he was a little bit of a bully. And she's like,
Mm.
you always want to think, not my kid, not my kid. But sometimes just a fun satire, like even that chapter just makes you take a step back and be like, well, actually, maybe I should pay attention to this because I got to nip this in the bud now. So yeah, it's just,
Well, as a
it's,
parent, it makes it less so serious all the time because it's heavy. Raising children is constant reminders of this is going to be a human being out in the world. And now more than ever, we have very, very distinct examples of what we do not want our children.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so it is very heavy. It is a very heavy. So to have things like that, like as you were saying that, I'm like, okay, my first one is a French Bordeaux. My second one is a Cab Sav. He's a mix. I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, what are my favorites? My third is a Malbec. So, it's really actually I love what you say about giving it as a gift with a baby shower gift because it's a nice way of reminding parents that it's not always so heavy and serious. These are lessons, yes, but it can be fun too. So why don't would you please read us an excerpt from this because I love it because I want everyone to feel the vibe of what this book contains.
Thank you. So I'll read the chapter. You don't want your kids to ferment. So as I said, it's a wine lover's guide to parenting, the fine art of wine and wine management. So it's illustrated, written like a children's book. It rhymes. But every time I use wine terminology, it gives the definition. At the back of the book gives a basic understanding of how wine's made. So it's great for wine lovers too, even if
I
you don't
love
have
it.
kids. But in the winemaking process, fermentation is when you convert sugar to alcohol. So sugar we think is something sweet. Alcohol we think of can be harsh, biting. So this is about you don't want your kids turning from someone sweet to someone harsh and biting because they don't have manners. Manners, manners, manners are the key to it all. These lessons need to start even when they're small. Teach them this from day one before they start to crawl. You don't want your kid to be the sour grape in the bunch and turn into a spoiled brat that kids want to punch. When they start talking, make sure they know thank you and please, and to always say bless you when they hear someone sneeze. Please and thank you are an absolute must. Without that, your child's a total bust. There's nothing worse than a child who has behavior that is crude, because it'll continue as they're older and become someone who's rude. People don't take kindly to and aren't nice to those with attitude, because it's very off-putting and puts others in a bad mood, oftentimes causing confrontation and leads to a nasty feud. Wanting to put a little bit of poison in your child's food. Is this really how you want your kids to be viewed? Wouldn't you prefer that there's someone who's wooed? Without manners, they'll ferment and turn into someone harsh and biting. They may turn into a kid who's rude, obnoxious, and always fighting. So teach your kids some manners and to have some heart and soul. Without that, your kid may well turn into an a-hole.
I love it. That's so good. That is so good. Do you have it? Let's see the cover so that everybody on YouTube can see. Oh, that's so good and so appropriate. I love it. Um, so the theme of season 2, Revitalized Womanhood podcast season 2 is live like her now. So I'm going to end with this question for you. The title of this podcast episode is Stop Waiting for the Life You Planned and Start Loving the Life You Have. What would be your biggest, most important advice for the women listening that are looking for help embracing this concept?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the greatest lessons I've learned is that when life doesn't unfold the way you imagined or quote unquote planned, it doesn't mean that joy is no longer available to you. Sometimes it just shows up in a different form, a different place. And, I didn't end up following the exact path I once pictured, but I've discovered that there's beauty in the unexpected chapters. And the key is willing to embrace the life that's actually in front of you instead of mourning the one they thought you have. Um, Embrace the pivots, lean into it, let that propel you forward. Yeah, the joy isn't reserved just for one specific outcome. There can be there can be joy in many different things. And when one door closes, other possibilities open up and you just have to be willing to walk through that door.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your story with us. I really appreciate you. Especially thank you for working with my schedule with my kids and
Of course.
rescheduling with me. But I'm so glad we got to do this. And thank you so much for your time, Danielle.
Thanks for having me. It's lovely to chat with you.
You too.